Okay. Okie dokie dokie. I think we've got that dealt with now. So whenever you're seeing this, you're a few seconds behind me because I was fumbling around there. Hello, good evening. Welcome. Nice to be with you. I'm Tad. You're all of you guys. And that's good. That's a good thing. As you can see, I am still in the unfinished Office of Doom with the many, many, many unmoved boxes of Doom and two cats of Doom, but I'm not sure where they are right at the moment. There was one up there a moment ago, but don't see any cat. All right. We've messed up the focus by moving away. All right, there we go. Anyway, so we just, as I said, be aware. Living in the hills as we do, there's always the possibility, especially after a heavy rainstorm, that a tree is going to fall over and take out some power lines, and I will just vanish as if I never existed, which may make some people happy, but will not make me happy. But I'm just warning you ahead of time because that is the pattern. What else? What else? What else? Well, had been working on Ordinary Farm, as mentioned, but I am now going to be going through the copy edited page proofs of Navigator's Children, which is slowly drawing closer to publication. As I have said many times before, it's a bit frustrating because I was basically ready with it like a year ago. But by the time I got it done, I guess the schedule had shifted and they had to make decisions, and I had been bumped back, and that was the first available opening. So we still have many months to go before it will arrive, but I will be working on other things during that time. So I will not make much difference to my working schedule, but I apologize for my publishing schedule. Let me think. Anything else? Yes, I should check in and say hello to people and see if people have showed up. And there are a few here who have checked in already. I see Christina and Nicole and Iris and Mark. And who else has checked in? Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Winter. Good to see you. Petra. You too. Come back here. Dirk. Chris. Hello, Chris. Jeremy. Hello, buddy. Rosalba. Kristen. Nicole. I already said hello to. And Mark. And Sandra. And Nikki. And Penny Davies. Hello, Penny. And Debbie. And Christy. And so I think I've got... Oh, and there's Ilva has just popped in, too. Thanks, Ilva. Ilva's talking about how she's enjoying Witchwood Crown after knowing the full story, because Ilva's one of my readers. So Ilva has actually read the first draft of the end of the book. Not that it's going to change much, but there will be little polishy bits and stuff like that. So thank you, Ilva. That's good to know, as always. And of course, you and Ron and Jeremy and Angela have all been huge helps on these books. But you're not off the hook yet, because we're going to be doing timeline work for the for the Flans Crows books. There will be, and who knows, my publishers are already saying, do you think you're going to write another Ostenard, Dragonbone Chair, Witchwood Crown, like a third series with some of those characters? And I said, it's possible. I could be talked into it. We shall see what we shall see. If my cats, dogs, and children do not drive me into a mental institution or an early grave, there's a very good chance that I might. And I deliberately, unlike the first set of books where everybody thought I was setting up a sequel, but I wasn't. I was just trying to show that interesting magical things would keep happening in Ostenard, and it wasn't just this story. But I deliberately left a few things dangling in the last book, which you will all see when it gets published, with the full intention that, if possible, someday I'd like to get back and follow up on them. So we shall see, as I said, what we shall see. Anyway, let's see what else. So yeah, so we're we're here. We're moved in, but we're not moved in the normal sense. We're still remodeling the kitchen. We finally got the refrigerator, which is doubly important because now we can keep the ants off of our food. Yay! Not that we can't cook or anything yet because we don't have the rest of that stuff, and we're waiting for the kitchen counters to show up, and then we can finish most stuff. But we're still a couple of weeks away. So you will probably hear from me next week complaining about how we have no kitchen still. But so we're doing that, and we're dealing with sad dogs who don't want to go outside because it's been pouring rain all day. And even when they need to go outside, they sometimes won't go outside, which is not such a problem for Walter because Walter is the Chihuahua, the small dog, and Walter has no qualms whatsoever about evacuating himself pretty much anywhere and anytime. But poor Johnny, who is a really well-behaved large dog, of course, is just holding it in like crazy for hours at a stretch. Won't go outside. I suppose I could try to carry him, but he's big. So the poor guy, is just suffering, waiting for the rains to stop. So I didn't mean to go that far into the eliminatory habits of my dogs, but it's been a major part of my life at the moment. I don't know if you saw that in the background. One of the two cats here just went by. There is a black cat and an orange cat. Black cat, just to make things confusing, these are our daughter's cats. Black cat is named TJ. Orange cat is named PJ. They're easy to tell apart, but not by name. That's always confusing, and I will never forgive her for that. So I've already started calling PJ Peach Pit James. I haven't come up with a suitable name for TJ yet. TJ is also wearing the cone of shame because TJ had to have some surgery. And so poor TJ is thumping around. And of course, constantly turning the collar backward by trying to get between the boxes here, especially before he got to know me. And every time I'd come into the room, he'd bolt for a hiding place. But we're buds now, more or less. As much as we are going to be for a cat who's been traumatized by having a cone put on him. This is also a cloth cone, so he can fold it back if he tries to go between some boxes. So we're constantly having to catch him and pull the cone back to where it's supposed to be. Okay, what else? Oh, this is absolutely out of nowhere, but it's actually just reinforces for me how poisonous sometimes the internet conversations can be. And I'm not even talking politics here. I'm talking just like films and things like that, and everybody's a critic and everybody has got their agenda that they're pushing. And I was thinking about this because after months and months of not having access to all of our TV channels for reasons too complicated to explain, but suffice it to say, I spent two-hour visits over the past 2 days trying to get that straightened out down at the Xfinity store, because that's our local carrier. And finally got the Disney Plus channel back and watched the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie, which I'd seen a couple of pretty good reviews about. But other than that, it was like all I ever see online is Marvel's washed, Marvel's doomed, they've screwed everything up, they're blah, blah, nobody likes them. A lot of it anti-female stuff because they have gone out of their way to try and center some of the female characters in the Marvel Comics line. And this, of course, this is the thing that if you ever do this, witness Star Wars and everything else, and God forbid, Ghostbusters. And, of course, then just a mass of angry, butthurt little boys rises up all over the internet to scream and yell about how, this is a crime, a sin, a this or that. And this is one of the reasons, not the only reason. I mean, Marvel has overextended a bit, but this is one of the reasons that there's just so much whining and complaining. And anyway, I watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3 tonight, which I hadn't been able to see in the theater, and I really enjoyed it. James Gunn is still good at what he does. He was the writer-director. He has moved over to DC now, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do there with Superman and Batman and all that stuff, all that DC stuff. But it's a good movie, action movie, with sweet and funny in places. And it's like if you liked the first two Guardians, I think it was better than the second one, actually. I think it was, right up there with the first one. Of course, not as much of a novelty. The first one was kind of unexpected that it would be good. But anyway, so it just reminded me of how much poisonousness there is, and it's not it's not like a permanent state of affairs. I think a lot of what it is that it's so exciting to everybody now that they can share their opinions, and the entire world can see those opinions. But there's a lot of people who are just sad, mean-minded, unhappy people, and releasing all of that energy out into the world, not necessarily a good thing. But we as a species will learn to deal with it. We will learn, we will go forward. We're all going to be plugged into each other's heads eventually in some shape or form. There's no question about that. That's where humanity is going. We already basically carry little computers around in our pockets, so unless something goes badly wrong, we're never out of touch with all of contemporary civilization and what Kim Kardashian is doing with the filters on her phone, and whether Taylor Swift and her Kansas City Chiefs boyfriend are getting along, and blah 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 blah, which is all fine. Humans have always been interested in gossip and all that. But what we don't have at this point yet is sort of we're not inured to it. We haven't developed the armor to just kind of ignore 95, 99% of it. And Sturgeon's Law is most definitely in effect. For those of you who don't remember or know about Sturgeon's Law, I think I've explained it before. Mary, what's her name, the writer who wrote The Women, I've just gone blank. But anyway, she was on a literary panel with Theodore Sturgeon, the science fiction writer. Very, very smart guy, very fine writer. If you don't know the work of Theodore Sturgeon and you have any interest in science fiction, you owe it to yourself to go out and pick up a book of short stories or his novel More Than Human or something like that. Whimsical, crazy, fun, interesting, thought-provoking, and very human stories, largely. But anyway, and Mary, what's her name, whose name has just escaped me at the moment, said, Ted, I don't understand. You're such an intelligent guy. You've got so many, wise things to say and all that, and yet you're in science fiction. 90% of science fiction is just crap. And he said, Mary, 90% of everything is crap. And that's become Sturgeon's Law in the science fiction community. And I fully believe it. So we will get better. This is the point of this story. We will get better at filtering out the crap as a species. Right now, we're not very good at it yet, which is why so much bogus information controls so much of how people make decisions these days, and how much, bias confirmation goes on and all this stuff. People are not used to it yet. I think, I am an optimist, I do think that we will get better as a society, as a world society, at sifting out the crap and learning how to act on the stuff that actually matters. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're doomed. I don't think so, though. Anyway, so without further ado, actually with slightly ado, I'm going to go back and just double check and see who else has showed up. And there's Katya has showed up, and Tash, and Wouter, and my mother-in-law, Hazel. Hello, sweetie. Good to see you. Your daughter's fine. Your granddaughter is out of the house for the night, so it's just us and the dogs, and she is currently cuddling small dog and sleeping. I think I said hello to everybody else. Anamika, I didn't say hello to, I don't think. So hello to you too. And with that, and having discharged my social obligations of saying hello to as many people as I can, I am going to start reading. Right. So, we were in the middle of a chapter, the name of which I cannot recall, but let me just go back and check and see what it was. I think it was like chapter, oh God, I've gone back so far now. There we go. Chapter 27, Noontide at the Quarely Maid, which is a pub. And now I'm going to find where I was again. There we go. Okay, so what's going on is that Simon and Mary Mel, King and Queen, if you will remember, are going to bed for the night, and Simon's friend Jeremias, who is now their Lord Chamberlain in charge of, the bedchambers and their wardrobes and all that stuff. And that's what is going on. He's helping them get ready for bed. I'm just going to skip back a couple of paragraphs. It, it's just that Jeremias broke off, his eye caught by Miriamel, who was being helped out of her dress behind a screen by two of her ladies in waiting. She saw him and gave him a look which made him redden. Master of the bedchamber is a title of honor, Jeremias, she said, her gown halfway down her shoulders. She wore only a shift underneath. You don't actually have to stay with us. Jeremias turned an even deeper shade of pink. Oh, I beg your pardon, Majesty. Yes, it truly has been a long day, Simon said, wondering why Jeremias would not take the hint. Everyone is tired. I just wanted to thank you for including me in the inner council. Simon waved his hand. You've always been a good friend, Jeremias, and you saved my life on the Frostmarch Road. I intend to give you more honor and responsibilities, too, never fear. But I noticed you didn't say much. The Lord Chamberlain shrugged and would not look up at him. At times he seemed little more than the awkward youth of Simon's own childhood, somehow transported into the thickening body of a middle-aged man. What would I have to say? I keep track of food and linens. I don't know anything about making war. Please, Jeremias, said Miriamel, her voice a little impatient. Nobody is going to make war, at least we hope not. We simply have to be prepared for what may happen. Just like you with your linens and food. Jeremias was looking at the floor, but he squared his shoulders. Still, you have been good to me, Simon. You both have. Simon could tell he wanted to say something else, but the king had been listening to people all day long, and he was dizzy with talk. You're my friend, and always will be, Jem. Now, would you please accompany the Queen's ladies to the outer room? We'd like to go to bed. Jeremias looked stricken. Of course. I'm sorry, it's late. I wasn't thinking. The servants can go too, Simon said. Mary and I would like a little time to talk alone. Of course, Majesties. He straightened whatever was troubling him, put aside by the reminder of his duties. Simon hated treating Jeremias like just another underling, but he had reached the point where he was about ready to pick the Lord Chamberlain up by the scruff and drag him, along with the ladies in waiting, the servants and the squires, straight out of the bedchamber. Oh, and I see a black cat in a blue cone has just made an appearance right behind my head. Now, that won't be distracting at all, TJ. No, not at all. When the little caravan had at last departed, Simon pulled off his clothes and climbed under the coverlet. Miriamel put her jewelry back into the box and sat down to brush her hair. What do you think that was all about? He asked. What? Jeremias? I was beginning to wonder if he was ever going to leave. I thought he was going to insist on putting my slippers on. He scowled. I hate it when he acts like that, like a faithful hound. He's known me since we were both grasshoppers. You've treated him well, Simon. A chandler's apprentice who became Lord Chamberlain of the High Throne. He doesn't have much to complain about. Simon knew her tone. In other words, stop worrying so much. She caught his eye in the mirror and showed him a weary smile. Precisely. Simon sat higher against the headboard so he could watch her more easily. I suppose you're right. It's not like we don't have enough to deal with. You heard what Tiamat said about the Scytha woman. He and Thalia and that nice brother Eitan have done all that could be done, Simon. Don't take every trouble on yourself. But why did they send someone after all this time? And what are we going to do? What can we do? Miriamel asked. She is dying. We must Try to find out who shot her, I suppose, although it was probably poachers. With poisoned arrows? Simon shook his head. Besides, that's not what I mean. What are we going to do about her? She'll die if we don't get her back to her people. Miriamel rose from her mirror and came and sat at the end of the bed. Even if we knew how to find Jiriki and the rest, we don't know that they could do anything for her. She's dying, Simon. Any mortal would have been dead before we returned. When the Scythi don't hear from her, they will send another envoy or a message. But we can't just wait. Simon would have been shocked at her callousness, but long experience had taught him that a tired Miriamel was a rather heartless Miriamel. He took a breath and started again. We can't afford to wait, Miri. Do you think it's just chance that the Scythi were sending her to us now, after years of nothing, at the very moment when the Norns are stirring again? When they're crossing our borders and that silver-faced bitch, their queen, is hunting for something called the Witchwood crown? We may be putting too much trust in that bizarre message. But why go to the trouble of sending us any message at all? Perhaps this Jarnulf thought he would be captured. Jarnulf, wasn't it? Simon put his hands behind his head and watched his wife looking at herself in the glass. No, that doesn't make sense either. And don't you see, Miri, even if the Scythi hadn't sent this messenger, or whatever she is, it would still be time to try to reach out to them. Jiriki may know what's happening with the Norns, but if he doesn't, he should be told all that we've heard. He sighed. And I want to see him again so badly. His sister, you mean? Aditu? Yes, her too. Yes, her too. His wife was suddenly distant. It must be nice to live forever, like the Scythi, she said, staring into the mirror. To stay young and lovely while everyone else is getting old. Simon laughed. Would you really like that? To stay the young girl I first met, while I grew old beside you, while everyone around us grew old too? I like your wrinkles and your gray hairs, wife. They remind me of the life we've had together. She put her hairbrush down with exaggerated care, as if what she truly wanted to do was throw it at him. So, you are telling me that if Aditu were here now, slinking around with her flimsy garb and her charming, mysterious ways, you wouldn't be following her like a dog smelling raw meat? What is this? Are you jealous of Aditu? Dearest, I haven't seen her for years and years. Not to mention that there was never anything between us. Oh, and that she's at least a couple of centuries older than either of us. He tried to be amused, but it was more difficult than he expected. I thought you cared for Jiriki and Aditu, as I did, Miri. You lived with them. I didn't. Miriamel sighed. Oh, I don't know. I do care about them. I was as excited as you when I thought things would change between their people and ours, but they've always been secretive. They prefer to stay hidden, to stay out of our affairs. The Scythi prefer to remain hidden because our people kept trying to kill them, my dear. We both hoped we could change that. But even more important, they know the Norns far better than we do. Now, come to bed. I want to talk to you about something else. I'm very tired, Simon. Not that. But here, climb in beside me. You'll catch cold sitting out like that in your nightdress. He held the coverlet up for her, and she slid close so that he could feel the cool of her skin through the thin cloth she wore. I'm here. What did you want to talk about? Simon took a breath. I think we should take the Scytha woman back to her people in Aldort Forest. And I think I should go with her. It's time for us to talk to Jiriki and the rest of the Scythi, to find out why they have been silent so long. Miriamel stiffened against his side. Absolutely not. But why? Miri, you saw those creatures we fought. That giant! What if we must go to war against the Norns again? I would not think of doing it without advice from the Scythi. And I don't think we can stand by and simply let their envoy die either, not when her own people may be able to heal her. The queen spoke quietly, but she was not happy. Some of that makes sense, and I need to think about it. But whatever happens, you are not going, Simon. Between that trip to Merrimond and then traveling to Elvritsala for poor Isgrimnur, our people here have scarcely seen you in the last half year. You tell me there could be a war, but then the first thing you propose is to go charging off across the countryside again like you did when you were young on some noble, jolly quest to find the Scythi? You are bending my words until I don't even recognize them. He hated when she talked to him as if all he wanted to do was be young and without responsibilities again. Of course, there was a secret part of him that sometimes wished for just that. But who did not have such a peevish, childlike voice inside them, urging them to throw off the coils of maturity? And I am not speaking as the boy you once met, or even as your husband. I am speaking as the king of all the High Ward. And I am speaking as the queen. And the queen says that the king cannot afford to go sailing off on an adventure in the midst of all that we have to deal with. Did you forget Hernystir and the tales of Hugh's devil worship? Did you not hear Passavales tell us Naban is a boiling cauldron that could spill over at any moment? He kept his mouth closed a long time, waiting until he no longer felt like grinding his teeth together in frustration. Then what should we do, Miriamel? I won't simply wait for this woman to die and hope that Jariki sends someone else. She turned her back to him, but stayed close enough to benefit from the heat of his body. Send Eolair. If you must send someone, he is Hand of the Throne. Such duties are his. And he knows the Scythi almost as well as we do. Eolair is so worried about Hernystir, he can barely keep his mind on what is in front of him. All the more reason to send him. Give him something important to occupy him, until we know better whether Hugh is truly becoming a problem. Send Eolair. Or send someone else, but you are not going, Simon. He lay silently for a while, thinking. Miri? She didn't answer immediately. What? Are you angry at me? For suggesting that you should go riding off to find the Scythi when there are 100 things here that require your attention? Why should I be? You're angry. She rolled over, put her head upon his chest. Yes, a bit. It will pass, though. It always does. Chapter 28. Cradle Songs of Red Pig Lagoon. It was a long walk across the camp to the edge of the meadow where Unver and his stepfather kept their wagons, but several days had passed since Frimer had last seen the tall man. Everybody else was spreading the news, but he wondered if Unver had heard anything at all. Frimer did not like walking, but when his horse had eventually wandered back after the raid on the Stone Dweller settlement, his brother Odrig had claimed it, saying, "Any man who cannot keep his horse does not deserve one." Everyone in the Crane clan seemed to know about this, so there was no shortage of mockery as Frimer trudged between the wagons and out toward Birch Meadow. He kept his head down and bit his lip to prevent himself from shouting back. Odrig himself had made it clear that he approved of the insults. "Until you grow a man's tough skin, you are useless to me or anyone else," he had said only the previous night. "You are like a warrior made of cheese." Odrig's way of toughening a man's skin seemed to be frequent beatings and humiliation in front of the other clansfolk. Framer did not think the skin of his body had toughened much since childhood, but there were times when he felt certain his heart had shrunken and hardened like wet leather left in the sun. He often thought of himself that way, as if his insides were a rawhide knot, something that would only grow tighter the harder it was pulled. He sensed something like that in Unver as well, although whatever was drawn tight inside Unver was under much greater strain, like the huge ropes used to tug the standing stones at the clan ground back upright after an earth tremor had felled them. The ropes had creaked with every pull against the stone's unimaginable weight, until it seemed like the great cords and the muscles of the men who pulled on them were at war with the earth itself. Unver was like that, but his cords never slackened. The other men of the Crane clan disliked him, but they feared him too, his height and long arms and his hard, blank face, as unchanging as one of those stones standing against all wind and weather. He is too fierce, Framer thought, and he does not bend his back to my brother, does not bend his neck to my brother. Some day, Odrig will kill him, or drive him out of the clan. Nobody in the clan, except for perhaps the tall man's stepfather, Jakar, could even remember Unver's real name. When he had first come to the clan as a gangly boy, someone had asked him who he was. Unver, he had replied, staring at Odrig and the other boys like a bear surrounded by baying dogs. It meant nobody. And that was what the clan had called him ever since. Even Framer's sister, Kolva, still called him that, and she was one of the few folk who treated the tall man with kindness. To the rest, he was only a strange, unfriendly clansman who lived with his drunken stepfather on the outskirts of the camp. A good horseman and fierce fighter, but otherwise to be avoided. As Framer reached the edge of the meadow, he saw old Jakar sitting on the steps of his wagon, sharpening a knife with long, screeching strokes. Framer wanted nothing to do with the sour old man, so he took a path through the trees, around behind Jakar's ill-maintained wagon, and into the grove of birches, where, as expected, he found Unver, who was using stones to smooth the wood of his unfinished wagon, while his big dark horse Deafol nipped listlessly at the grass. The green was thick on the plains at this time of the year, and all the horses were growing fat. It was a time of celebration, at least for most of the clan. "Ho, rider," Framer called. "May your hooves always find the path." Unver looked up. "I can't say the same for you. Where is your horse?" Framer didn't really want to talk about it. Instead, he nodded toward Unver's wagon, which looked as though it was nearly finished, an altogether finer piece of work than his stepfather Jakar's rickety cart. The wagon was not yet painted, but every joint showed careful attention, and every spoke of the wheels had been rubbed as smooth as glass. "How does it go?" "Well enough." Unver held out the wineskin. "I would help you to finish, if you want," Framer said, taking a sip of the sour red stuff. "Your wagon, I mean, not your wine. Since I have no horse, there is little else for me to do." Unver raised an eyebrow, but did not ask the obvious question. "There is more polishing to do before the paint. You could help with that. But the grass thunderer save you if you put a nick in the wood, mouse." He did not know why he said what he said next, but he said it. "I have never liked that name." Unver watched him take a long swallow, then took the wine back and had a drink himself before wiping the residue from his long mustaches. He was not so dark as most of the clan, whose skin the sun and dust of the plains usually turned the color of cherry wood. Unver's flesh was lighter, like the rounded tan stones in the bottom of riverbeds. His prominent nose was sharp and thin, his cheekbones high, but the strangest things about him were his eyes, gray as rain clouds. Framer waited, but Unver did not ask him to explain what he had said about his nickname. Instead, the tall man watched as a pair of clansmen rode by on the far side of the meadow, a long bow shot away. The squinting, storm-colored eyes followed them until they were gone, as though Unver were a hunting animal and they were prey. Fremer was growing frustrated by the other man's silence. He had come here with a yearning for comradeship, looking for someone else who knew what it meant to be an outsider in his own clan. "What do you think of my sister, Kolva?" he said, then immediately regretted it. He had come to give news. This was not the best way to deliver it, but he had been stung by Unver's seeming disinterest. The other man looked at him carefully, as though the words might be some kind of trap. "She is a woman." He seemed to realize this was inadequate. "She is a good woman." "You care about her." Fremer said it as a statement, not a question. Unver's expression grew more remote, as if a cold wind had brought frost. "She is nothing particular to me, and it is nothing to you either. I have seen you walking together." Unver's hand dropped to the knife at his belt, and his face hardened into something fearsome. "You have been spying for Odrig." "No, no, but I have seen you together twice, walking and talking, when I was looking for her. And I know my sister. She would not be so easy with you if you had not spoken together that way many times." Still the gray eyes fixed him, but at last Unver let his hand fall away from the knife. "Why do you say these things to me, Fremer? Do you plan to defend her honor yourself? If you insist, it will be so, but you will die for nothing, and her reputation will be ruined. I have not dishonored her in any way. We merely spoke, away from wagging tongues." He narrowed his eyes. "Or are tongues wagging already? Is that what you have come to tell me?" Fremer was about to answer him, but Unver leaped to his feet suddenly and strode toward the unpainted wagon. "You must think me a fool, as all the rest of the clan does. Would I try to steal the sister of the Thane? I would be hunted forever." He stopped and spread his arms. "No, this is what I have built with my own hands, the finest wagon in the Crane clan. I have gone on every raid, I have taken every task anyone would give me. Look!" He threw open the door of the wagon and pulled out an oilcloth bundle. He unwrapped it as Fremer stared, revealing a tumble of bright objects. "Real gold for the horses' traces and reins. Silver for the hinges and fittings, specially made by the finest smith in the Lynx clan. When I show this wagon to your brother, he and those other fools, their eyes will pop out. He will have no choice but to give Kolva to me." Unver was breathing hard as he rolled. Let me try that a third time. Unver was breathing hard as he rolled the oilcloth again, as though he had run a long way. He shook the bundle at Fremer, and the fittings clinked. "She will ride like a queen of the Lakelands." Fremer now felt sick at his stomach. He had only wanted to make bad blood between Unver and his hated brother. He had not understood. "But that is not enough." He was angry and would not look at Fremer. "Then I will get enough. I will bring your brother a dowry of fine horses. Not all my gold has gone to buy fittings. Unver, no." Fremer shook his head. He did not know where to begin. "That is not what... I only came to tell you." His eyes almost seemed mad. "What? Tell me what?" "That my sister Kolva..." Fremer swallowed. It was not easy because the lump in his throat seemed big enough to choke him. "My brother has promised her to Droyan. They will set out the marriage stones at the clan gathering when the moon is full." Unver did not say a word for long moments. He only looked at Fremer as though he had suddenly sprouted feathers and flown into the air. "A lie," he said at last, but his voice was hollow. "It is no lie. I hadn't seen you for days, and I didn't know if you'd heard." He was suddenly frightened and tried to find words that would change the terrifying animal look in the man's eyes. "I didn't know that she meant so much to you, Unver. That is truth. But you must have known Odric would never give her to you. You are—" He could not think of how to say it because he was the same way himself. Like a fish in a stream, how could he find a word for the water that was everywhere, that they both breathed and swam in? "You are unworthy. That is what Odric thinks. Drojan is his friend. Drojan does everything that Odric says." The oilcloth bundle dropped from Unver's fingers to the ground, and his face went pale as dry grass. For a stretching moment, Framer was certain Unver would pull the knife from his belt and kill him, and he knew there was nothing he could do to prevent it. Expressions flickered across the tall man's face so swiftly that Framer could not make sense of any of them. Then Unver found his voice. "Go!" he roared. "Get away from me, you and your cursed family. What are you but the crow who brings bad tidings, screeching and preening on a tree branch? Your sister is as false as a stone dweller's bargain. It's not her doing. Go!" And with this last cry of rage, Unver turned his back on Framer and strode back toward the wagon he had worked on so long and carefully. He put his hands against the side of it and pushed until the muscles of his neck bulged. The wood creaked and the wagon tottered, but it did not tip. It was too large for any single man to push it over, or so Framer thought. Then Unver bent his legs beneath him, leaned his entire body into the side of the wagon, and with a wordless cry of rage managed to topple it. It fell slowly, as in a dream, and hit the ground hard, with a crash like thunder, splintering into pieces. Framer turned and ran. Next section. Jeza carefully swaddled Saracina and brought her to her mother, who was sitting near the window with 3 of her ladies in waiting, taking advantage of the afternoon light to work at their sewing. "Ah, there she is, the little coney, the little fur rabbit," said the Duchess. She set down her sewing and took the baby from Jeza, who stood by patiently. It was time for little Saracina to nap, and this was how it was done. Jeza did not entirely understand why a woman who loved her daughter as much as Duchess Canthia spent so little time holding her. In the Ran, where Jeza had been born, a child was put in a sling against her mother's belly as soon as she could hold her head up, and rode that way all day. Drylander children, at least those Jeza had known here in Naban, were treated more like beautiful jewelry or clothing, to be taken out by their mothers and admired, then soon put back again. It was puzzling, but Jeza had given up trying to understand. Things were just different here among the Drylanders, and Jeza had to believe that she who birthed mankind had made them that way for some good reason. But as she took the baby back from the Duchess and set her in her huge painted cradle, it was hard to imagine what that reason could be. Despite the tight swaddling, little Saracina fussed and wriggled. To quiet her, Jeza sank into a crouch beside the cradle and began to rock it. Duchess Canthia was a kind woman and would not have begrudged her a stool to sit on, but Jeza was never entirely comfortable perched on such a thing. Some of the furniture the Drylanders used felt to her as untrustworthy as ill-made boats, as if any moment they might tip and throw her down. She had been squatting on her heels since she had been only a few months older than little Saracina, and she was comfortable that way. The Duchess and her ladies talked quietly among themselves, but Jeza could tell from the way they glanced over their shoulders toward the cradle that Saracina's crying was irritating some of them, so she began to sing one of the songs her own mother had sung to her long ago in their house on stilts in Red Pig Lagoon. Come, moon, come, sweet moon, come across the marsh, bring an armful of mallows. Come in a pole boat, bring a handful of hyacinths. Come across the stream, bring a comb of honey. Come on a carry chair, bringing milk and curd. Come on walking feet, bring a basket of bilberries. Now listen to me and hold them tight. Keep them here for baby's delight. As Jeza sang and rocked the cradle, she wondered if she would ever hold a baby of her own. She had not been much more than a child herself when she first came to Naban, purchased as a companion and servant for the Duchess when they were both young girls. Canthia had been fond of her, so when she grew up and began to have children of her own, first her son Blazes, and now the new baby, the Duchess had kept Jeza on as a nurse for the children. Jeza missed her home sometimes, of course, and would never entirely get used to going days at a time without feeling soil or water beneath her feet. But when Jeza thought of her own mother and all that woman's back-breaking work, gathering and pounding roots all day long, mending nets and tending children as well, or when she considered the many other Rand folks she saw here in Naban whose daily work seemed so hard and dangerous, she thought that even with no child of her own, she must still be one of the luckiest people in the world. Jeza had just begun a new cradle song when someone knocked at the door. One of the Duchess's ladies-in-waiting rose to open it. It was the Duke himself, and when Saluceris made it clear he wanted to talk to his wife in private, the high-born ladies gathered themselves up and went out, chatting happily about visiting the Sancelans' courtyard garden as though they would have been headed there even had the Duchess's husband not arrived. Duke Saluceris glanced briefly at Jeza, where she crouched beside the cradle, but his gaze slid from her face as though she were made of polished stone. That was one of the strangest things about the Drylanders, Jeza had always thought. If they were not speaking to a servant face to face, they pretended that servant did not exist, as if their maids and nurses were only furniture. As the Duke approached, Duchess Canthia smiled and lifted her cheek. Saluceris bent and gave his wife a kiss. Excuse me. "I'm sorry to send your companions away," he told her, "but Terzian Vullus is pressing me for an answer, and I can't delay it much longer." "An answer to what?" "The betrothal. Surely you remember, I've been patient because of your condition, but Vullus has been waiting a long time." Canthia frowned very slightly, and Jeza thought it was like a cloud crossing the sun, bringing a moment of shadow to a beautiful day. Excuse me. "You say the betrothal, my husband, but surely I remember you speaking of a betrothal, or at least a suggestion of one by the Margrave." "Yes, that's right. I remember you said Vullus wished to wed his daughter to our Blazes, and I also remember saying that we would speak of it after the baby came." She smiled. "And surely, before we speak of it any more, you should go and look at your beautiful daughter, who is sleeping like the angelic gift that she is." The Duke sighed. "Don't be difficult. Of course I want to see my daughter." Jeza stopped rocking as Saluceris approached the cradle. Since he still did not look at her, only at tiny Saracina in her blanket, Jeza could examine the Duke. She seldom saw him from so close, despite her long connection with Duchess Canthia, and it always surprised her to see how very ordinary he was, this man with pale fish-belly skin and a neat sandy beard. He was tall and handsome enough in the bony-faced Drylander way, but he was in no way surprising. How could it be that after the High King and High Queen, those far-away people who Jeza knew only from stories, mythic figures like They Who Watch and Shape. Duke Saluceris was perhaps the most important person in all the world. The thought dizzied her a bit, as it often did, and with him standing so close, she was terrified at the thought she might suddenly tip and fall out of her squat. Only now that she was a woman herself had Jeza begun to understand how the Drylander world worked, and what a small, disregarded part of things her birthplace, the Ran, truly was. The realization had come to her just a few years before, when she learned that her mistress, who was also in many ways her closest friend from childhood on, was going to marry not just another lord, but the Duke of Naban himself, master of the biggest, most populous nation in all the world. The thought had been so frightening that for many sleepless nights Jeza had thought about running away, back to the swamp, back to her familiar lagoon. A girl like her had no business in the houses of such people. She could barely read, and what little she knew she had taught herself from watching Canthia and her tutors, but always from a distance. One night, shortly before the marriage, she had huddled all night at the foot of Canthia's bed, miserable at the idea of going to live in the Sancelin Mahistrevis, the great palace at the top of one of Naban's highest hills, where hundreds of servants already lived, each one fiercely envious of her position, no doubt. Here, in this strange country, Jeza knew, even monarchs had been killed. The other servants would probably do away with her in her bed the first night. They would beat the young Rana woman and throw her off the Sancelin's wall, and she would plummet all the way down to lie broken in the market at St. Galden's Square. "Don't be a fool, Jeza," she had told herself over and over again throughout that long night. "Jeza Green Honeybird, the elders named you. Green Honeybird didn't run home to her nest. When Tree Python chased her, she turned around and blinded him with her beak. Don't shame your namesake by acting like a coward." And as if the spirit bird had come to her then, in that dark night and in such a daunting, foreign place, Jeza had felt something whisper past her face and weave itself into a crown of air around her head. Then it was gone. But after that moment she had not been as frightened, and when she entered the Sancelin Mahistrevis for the first time, a fortnight later, following her mistress, she had been astonished and gratified to find she had lost her fear. From Red Pig Lagoon to this strange place, what a journey she was on. After he had stroked his infant daughter's face with a careful forefinger, Duke Saluceris abandoned the cradle, and within a few moments had begun pacing back and forth in front of the large window that looked out over the harbor. "It's really very difficult to see anything but you just now, my lord," said the Duchess, "and you won't stay in one place long enough for me to look at you properly either. It's not very restful." "I said don't be difficult, Canthia. I need Vullis, little as I like to admit it. The Dominiate is meeting next month, and Dallo in Gadarus is introducing some damnable notion of a tariff on wool for no other reason than to push me into a fight with the High Throne. But if I have Vullis, he will pull all our northern and western lords to my side." The Duchess smiled sadly. "My poor husband, you work so hard. Surely you do not have to convince people to listen to you. You are the Duke. The King and Queen themselves chose you. My brother hates me for it, and those cursed Ingadarines are going to do everything they can to use him as a weapon against me." Little Saracina woke up then and began to fuss, and soon Jeza lost track of what the Duchess and her husband were talking about. She had heard so much of this sort of thing that at first she had been frightened all the time. Thrithing's men were raiding. Naban's houses were at war with each other. But now she knew that the world was bigger than she had understood, that things which seemed close when her mistress and others spoke of them were actually far away and unlikely ever to trouble the Duke directly, let alone harm Jeza herself. But Some things, she had also learned, were actually closer than they seemed to be. This was proved true again just as Jeza finished patting and rocking the baby back into quiet once more and put her back in her cradle. A guard knocked on the door and announced the Duke's brother, Drusus, Earl of Trevinta and Eadne. "How can this be?" Saluceris looked startled, almost fearful. "He was at his place in the east." He stood up. "Never mind, I will meet him downstairs, dear, to spare you." But even before he had finished the sentence, the doors swung inward and Drusus strode in. "Forgive me," the Duke's half-brother shouted as if to a crowd. "I am filthy from the road, and I intrude on you even in your own chamber, dear sister-in-law." Jeza, who could be timid at the best of times, leaped in surprise at the newcomer's loud voice. She had never been in a small room with Earl Drusus before, though she had seen him at court functions, and he was always the subject of much conversation. Taller than his brother the Duke, and impressively muscular, Drusus was also daunting in other ways, with a handsome full-lipped face and thick curly hair, brown with a brassy shine. He wore the army of a cavalry general, although technically he was neither, or at least that was what Jeza had heard Saluceris complain many times. He also seemed to seethe with strength and youth, although he was but a single slim hour younger than his brother. It was almost impossible not to stare at him, though Jeza was terrified at the idea of meeting his eyes. "You are welcome any time, good Drusus, of course," said Duchess Canthea, holding out her hand to him. "This house is yours also, and always will be." "You are too kind, sister-in-law." He bowed and then kissed her hand. "Of course you are welcome," echoed Saluceris, but after the thunder of his brother's entrance, his words were spoken quietly, even reluctantly. "We are merely surprised to see you, brother. We thought you were at Chazu Orientis." "And so I was, but I wasted no time getting back. I could not bear to think of you and your young family sitting here in the Sansalin, oblivious to the dangers that threaten." "Dangers? What dangers?" the Duke demanded. Jeza thought he seemed split between genuine worry and annoyance at his brother's sudden, loud presence. "The horse-eaters! They have attacked us. They have attacked Chazu Orientis." Duchess Canthea put her sewing down. "That is terrible, Drusus. When did this happen?" "Just a sennight ago." Drusus walked to the window, looked down on the harbor and all the sails bobbing there like resting gulls. "I cannot believe the Thrithings men would be so mad to attack your home. What did they do?" "Oh, they did not besiege the castle itself," said Drusus, waving his hand as if to swat away a troublesome fly. "But they attacked Drinus Novus, a town within a few miles of the castle, on the edge of my land." "A settlement?" "Yes, I suppose. What does the name we give it matter? The barbarians killed a score of our people, wounded 3 times that many, and burned half the houses to the ground. Nearly 20 people dead, Saluceris, men, women, and children. Does it matter that their town is new?" Saluceris shook his head. "Of course not. But it matters to the Thrithings men that we are building towns on what was once their land." Drusus shook his head in outrage. "Are you defending these murderers, brother? What kind of thing is that for the Duke of Naban to do, when our own people are being killed by savages?" "It is terrible," said Canthea, looking to her husband. "Surely there is something we can do for them." Jeza thought Saluceris looked like a man who had just discovered that the widow he was marrying already had 8 fat, hungry children. "Of course we can help, wife. But you, brother, I don't understand what you want. Do you not have 20 knights or more at Chazu Orientis, and pikemen aplenty?" When Drusus scowled, his entire face changed, the strong, handsome features becoming almost a mummer's mask of sullen anger. "Do you think this is the only thing that has happened of late? Lester Hermes had his land raided 3 times in Faever. Last November, the cursed Thrithings men attacked the party of Escritor Realis on his way to Quinidopol. How long must we wait before we do something? Until they have set fire to the Mahastraven Hill, murdered our children, and raped our women in their own homes? His dark face had grown even darker with anger, but his eyes caught Duchess Canthea's, and it seemed to fluster him. I beg your pardon for my harsh speech, my lady. I am upset and careless because of it. He turned back to his brother. Do not think because you wear the ducal ring by a fluke of birth, Saluceris, that I will stand back and see our land overrun by savages, our villages burned, our people slaughtered. And because we're in the middle of a longish scene, I think I'm going to stop there. How much long? Oh, no, we've only got a page and a half. I'm going to finish. So never mind. You grow hot too quickly, Drusus, said the Duke. As his brother had grown darker, As his brother had grown darker, Saluceris had grown paler, so that they seemed opposites rather than the product of a single womb. Stand back and see our land overrun? I have said nothing of the sort. Those words are all yours. He took a breath, and even Jeza could see the Duke was fighting for control. When he lifted a hand up to stroke his beard, his fingers were trembling. No, we will discuss the problem and deal with it as we always have, in council with our fellow nobles and the Dominiate. Now, you have had a long ride, I doubt not, and little in the way of rest or refreshment. The dust of the road is still on you. Saluceris clapped his hands, and within a moment 2 servants had stepped through the door. Take my brother to his accustomed chamber and see that he has everything he needs, the Duke told them. We will speak again later, Drusus. Jeza saw that the Earl's face was still red with anger, but thought she saw something else, too. A gleam in Drusus's eye, like a hunter whose prey had finally broken cover. Very well, but I will not hide my feelings in front of Ingadorus, Albius, Clavies, and the rest. If you will not help me to stamp out these grassland vermin, brother, I will do it myself. With that he turned and strode out of the chamber, the 2 male servants scurrying to keep up with him. Little Saracina was crying again, and this time the Duchess came to take her from Jeza, pressing her daughter close against her and giving her a finger to suck until the baby's hitching sobs had quieted. Fetch the wet nurse, she told Jeza. Too much shouting. The child will need feeding before she'll sleep again. As Jeza was on her way out, she heard her mistress tell the Duke, I would forgive your brother much if I thought he was truly angry. What? The Duke sounded confused. What are you saying, Canthea? That I think it is an imposture, that he wears that angry face and those stormy sentiments like a mask. You do not understand Drusus, wife. He has always been strong-headed since he was a child, hot as fire. He has always leaped first and looked afterward. Oh, I think he looks exactly where he is going to leap, Canthea said, and it was surprising for Jeza to hear the harsh undercurrent in the Duchess's sweet voice. I think he looks very carefully. The door fell closed behind her, and Jeza did not hear any more. And that's where we're going to stop. And tomorrow night we are going to start Chapter 29, Brown Bones and Black Statues. So, with that, and I apologize for running slightly over, but I would prefer to end on a actual ending instead of having to stay in the middle of a paragraph or something. Okay, so I wish to thank you all for joining me. I am going to wrap it up for the night now and go pet some cats for a while since their daughter is out for the night. Or our daughter, their mother, keeper, friend, human, whatever you want to call them, is out for the night. So I'm going to go pet the cats a bit before going to bed. I hope you all are going to either come join me or listen to the next section. And in the interim, I hope you'll take very good care of yourselves, take good care of your friends and loved ones, help those around you where you can, and somehow, we will come out the other side into the light. Of course, it may just be an oncoming train, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Anyway, thanks for joining me. Peace, and see you real soon. Bye.